Hi everybody, Joe Cioffi on this Monday. We had a great day here in the northeastern part of the U.S. and actually a good portion of the eastern United States. East of the Rockies, the weather was pretty good today, and we are going to see a continuation of that for the next several days. We don't have the next weather front of consequence, and by that I mean producing showers, until Thursday night. And then we're going to see a sequence of events begin that will flip the pattern to a colder pattern with all this blocking that's running around in the Atlantic. It's been, a very long, arduous process that we've been watching for the last couple of weeks, and now we appear now to be headed for an end game here as far as where the pattern is concerned. And certainly today's model runs get us there. Both the European and the GFS get us there, although the models do differ somewhat in the path, and I'm kind of tending to lean more toward the GFS than the European, although I guess to be fair, we're going to blend the two, and where the GFS seems to be doing a better job of things in the western part of the U.S., and the European seems to be doing a bit of a better job with respect to things in the eastern part of the U.S. But let me just show you what's going on. First off, let's do the short range. Let's take a look at right now. We're going to look at the satellite loops of both coasts just to give you perspective. All the action continues to be what little action there has been across the U.S. Has been in the west, and that continues as we get these weather systems that keep coming into the Pacific Northwest. A bit of a break period here for the moment. There's some rain and snows that have moved into the Rockies, but into the central and northern Rockies, but not really producing all that much. And the next wave that you see here coming into the Pacific Northwest will be bringing another round of rain to Washington and Oregon, and possibly even into Northern California. The extent of that moisture goes pretty far to the south. Meanwhile, here in the eastern part of the U.S., we'll bring you the eastern satellite loop now and show you that things are pretty quiet. We had a very weak reinforcing surge of dry air come down overnight into this morning, and now we're waiting. There's a bit of a warm front that's setting up south of the Great Lakes. You can see the high clouds that are being produced there, but there's very little, if any, rain at all with this, or any snow for that matter, as the warmer air starts to come back. So a large chunk of the area east of the Rockies is either cloud-free or just has some patchy clouds, and then we've got some high clouds over southern Florida that are streaming up from the northwestern Caribbean. And you can see the subtropical jet here as it runs across the Bahamas and east-northeast out into the open waters of the Atlantic. You got a weather system that is moving toward Newfoundland at this point with clouds and some precipitation there. But on the whole, we continue to have an absence of major storms. This has been the case for quite a while now. The weather pattern has been not really favorable for even these minor systems. Haven't really done very much. But I want to jump, we're going to jump to the European and GFS to day 7 now. So every day that we're doing this, we get a day and day closer to the inevitable, and the models remain very, very consistent. So let me just point out what we're going to be looking for, and if you are a weather geek, what you should be looking for over the next number of days. The primary to me, the primary system that's going to really be very important is the system that forms south of the Maritimes here, which the GFS has, the European has this. I think that is going to be critical to how everything shapes up in terms of the structure of the trough in the eastern part of the United States for next week. The block is building northwestward across the Atlantic, kind of coming over the top here, and you get a bit of a ridge that pops up in the east temporarily in response to this storm that's forming out to the east. Meanwhile, we've got another trough that's coming through the Rockies and you've got energy that's coming down from Canada at the same time. So these are all the players. Again, I think this one, the system out in the Atlantic, is important because how it develops and where it develops will determine how strong the ridge gets to our west. I don't think, unlike, I've seen a few model runs on and off the last couple of days that really want to send this ridge soaring up the East Coast. Even if that happens, it would be temporary. It only would be for a day or so, because everything still seems to be happening with the same idea that we're going to go to a deep trough and a colder pattern in the eastern part of the United States. Now, this is for next Monday. That's the GFS's view. And I'll pull up now the Europeans' view of the same time frame. And one of the things that I think the European is wrong with, at least it seems to me that the European wants to take that energy in the west and dive it down into the southwest. It has a stronger system east of Cape Cod, a little bit further south than the GFS does. The ridge in the east that pops up is a little flatter, but it seems to want to take this energy that's out in the west and kind of dive it out in the southwest off Southern California. I'm really not I'm not really confident that the Europeans got that correct. We haven't seen, usually in instances where systems drop down into California and cut off, you see them over and over again. I know they has to start with the first one somewhere, but up until now, we haven't really seen anything like that happen. And I'm thinking that maybe now is not the time where we're going to see the first one. But there's upstream energy into Canada as well that's dropping southward. So now when we jump over to day 10 on the GFS and the European, you're going to see that both models get it cold. They just kind of do it in a different way. Since the GFS does not leave that system in the southwest but brings it eastward, you wind up with a strong blocking high that builds up west of Greenland, up through the Davis Strait and on up into northeastern Canada. And here you have this deep trough that the GFS creates as a vortex forms in southern Canada. So the flow comes pretty much straight from the Arctic down through Canada and into the eastern part of the United States, and actually extends pretty far south down into Florida, for that matter, in terms of the extent of the cold air, while a big ridge builds up in the west. This was, by the way, the 12Z run, so the run from mid-morning. And when we punch up, we're going to pull up the late afternoon run. You're going to see that there's actually, the GFS was pretty consistent from run to run. So that, we've been seeing a lot of these 12 to 18Z runs that have been sort of changing their minds. I see how the European kind of gets to the same idea in a different sort of way, because it locks this system up off of Southern California. You've got this big upper high that forms up in northern Washington and pushes up in the Pacific Northwest, but you still, in response to that, you still wind up with rather deep troughing in the east, but the trough is more toward the southeast U.S. and offshore rather than straight south toward Florida and the Gulf states. So the cold air kind of gets deflected more to the east rather than to the south in this situation. I'm thinking, again, that the system that the European leaves behind in the southwest is that the model is incorrect on this. We continue to see, by the way, from run to run, the block being handled differently, and that is another thing. That is going to be another variable that a big variable that we're going to watch out for, is how each model and each model run handles the block, because it especially as we go out deeper in time, the model errors in the strength and position of the block become very large, and they're larger than what they otherwise would be. So I don't expect, by the way, to see anything specific as far as, any kind of storms with respect to the model runs today. I would focus more on the upper air, and I will say, and we'll look at it separately, I will say that if we evolve in either pattern that evolves, be it the GFS or the European, but I think more so the GFS, I think there would be room for something to happen in the time frame of, you know, late next week and beyond. Okay, I just, to me, the upper air has that look that we might wind up with something trying to happen. Maybe it'll be over the weekend of the 9th, 10th, or 10th, 11th, somewhere in that time frame. So let's look at that you know, range as a possibility. Now here we go with the short range, and we've got the high moving out in the east. So we're going to have this warm up. Wednesday we should see temperatures, at least in my neck of the woods, the New York City, New Jersey, Long Island, Hudson Valley, eastern Pennsylvania, upper 50s and maybe even some middle 60s. Somebody might get to 64 or 5. A weak front's going to come through. Another little bubble high comes in with cooler air for Thursday. And then we have the setup for this cold front. Now, it's remarkable to me how the long range last week really basically showed a weak front with showers. And then we had a few runs that went gangbusters with the trough and the rain with the system coming in for Friday and Saturday. Now it's gone back to this weak look. And I guess that's where we're going with this. Low pressure eventually develops out to the east and gone, and then we have drier air that comes in for the weekend. And we've got that action now with that trough that comes into the west as we move towards Sunday. So we're back to rain and snows for the northwest, and that pushes inland. And now we're going to see, you know, what eventually winds up being as that deep trough forms on the GFS. And on the European, there's a cold front here. By the way, you can see the back edge of that coastal low that's going to be out south of the Maritimes that I said is going to be critical to all this. So we do have a front around the middle of next week, and it's behind it that we get into the cold air. Now, you'll notice, by the way, right down here, the model, you know, on the front, after the colder air starts to arrive, does form a wave that the GFS has pushes way out. But there is a lot of energy in the deep upper trough that's coming down, and you can see it here with the snow that it's sort of pinning out over parts of Minnesota and Iowa. The trough is broad, but there's energy on the western side of this trough that's diving down. So that's why I'm thinking that maybe that time frame of the 9th, 10th, somewhere in there, that we could wind up with some kind of a low here. I'm not sure whether it'll happen or not, but I think it's, you know, you got the trough certainly is going to try to be deep enough that maybe there'll be enough room for something. We'll see. We're going to watch these models over the next several days. But the bottom line is that we do have colder air coming into the east on the last two GFS runs that goes all the way down into northern Florida. And actually, probably some of that colder air goes all the way down into South Florida as well. And there's that big high that comes down as we move into now we're at December 11th and 12th. Again, you know, after day 10, it does get a little bit squirrely, so we will have to evaluate the situation. Here's the upper air with all this, and I'll go to the wider view, and we'll start from the beginning so you can watch it, you know, how this trough, watch the block, watch the area up near Greenland. I'll run it through a couple of times because, you know, it's hard to focus on everything at the same time. But you can see those higher than normal pressures continue. I'm going to switch maps. I'm sorry. Let's start this again. I just want to use the regular anomaly here. So the high shows up better. You can see where the browns and the up through Greenland, and at the same time you can watch the trough that starts to form in the eastern U.S. and that energy from Canada. You see how the GFS takes that whole southern system and just kind of ejects it eastward, and there's that strengthening trough from Hudson Bay down into the eastern Gulf states, and then this big upper high builds up toward Greenland, like a finger with a fingernail here, a closed high north of Newfoundland that puts itself there in position. So this trough just kind of sets right up right between 85 and 80 west, and the flow, if you look at the flow of air, it's coming from northernmost Canada right down into the southeastern part of the United States. Let me run that again so you could watch how it evolves. Look at, by the way, you know, as we start off with, the flow across the United States is basically from west to east. So you have this sort of normalized westerly flow, and then there's the higher pressures begin to build out in the North Atlantic, And the ridge also builds in the west, which is very important here. So you got this ridge building out in the west that builds up into western Canada, and then a deep trough that forms, and you get that flow again from northern Canada right down into the southeastern part of the U.S. And this is, by the way, at day 11 on the last frame. So I think we're going in this direction. The models seem to be, not only in sync, but the ensembles are pretty much saying the same thing. Everybody, they all seem to be on the same page here. So if it winds up flipping in another direction, I'd be shocked. I really would. I remember I was thinking back about one point last year during January, if I remember correctly, models were showing for a number of runs for over a course of days that the whole ridge trough in the west was going to break down, and that the trough was going to set up in the east, and then at the last minute, bam, the trough came right back in the west where it had been for a good chunk of the first part of the winter, and it went back to that, and the models were completely wrong. So you know what? Stranger things have happened. Meanwhile, through all of this, with the block initially with this east-based block, you've got cold air that pours down into Europe. This is the jet stream, goes way to the south. Look how far south it dips down into Spain and into the Mediterranean. We've been talking about this for many days now, and this is creating abnormally cold conditions across Europe. And there's going to be quite a bit of snow through all of this. I'll put the surface map in a second. Now, eventually, as our block starts to shift to the west, things begin to change a little bit across Europe. The flow becomes more southwest, except up in the northern areas. But you do have an upper high that starts to build in. So that's in response to the block shifting from being east-based to west-based. And here's the surface map, so you can watch these waves of moisture coming through. Again, I still don't know why, when I pull up the snow maps and I try to match them up with what's being shown at the surface, I'm seeing different things here. So I'm going to be paying attention to the surface weather in the coming days. But you can see some, the cold air and snow along the coast of England. I don't know if this is some kind of, I guess this may be their form of lake effect that occurs along the coast. I got to do some research on this. Or maybe somebody that's watching from up there might explain this. Is this a phenomena that occurs on the eastern shores of England and Scotland with the wind that comes in from the northeast, that you get some snow that falls just inland of the coast, kind of like the ocean effect that happens near Cape Cod, I would imagine. But we do see those snows up through France and into Italy again. Low pressure into the Mediterranean. You can see it spinning there. Now we're into next week. We're over into next Tuesday. And there's another system, a pretty strong system out in the Atlantic being indicated around day 10. Here's the snowfall for 10 days and all the way down into northern Spain. Much of France into snow, especially the eastern part. And you've got snows down through Italy. Even still showing, I guess these are some of the mountains in Sicily and in the southern part of Italy, where some snow is being indicated. Models actually showing a little bit less in those areas than it has before. Quite a bit in southern Germany, over into Poland, and throughout Eastern Europe. Looks like a sizable snow, some sizable snow amounts being indicated here, and also through much of northern England, but particularly into Scotland, showing quite a bit of snow over the next 10 days. Very interesting. I'm gonna, if anybody knows that's watching from England, if you could post it in the comments or leave me a comment on the video later, I would much appreciate it. Back to the U.S., and we'll look at our snowfall for the next 10 days, and you can see here nothing. Really no big deal. Some heavier snows in the northern Rockies, where it's been going on for so long now, and parts of the interior Intermountain West, a little bit up into New England, because again, we don't have any major systems yet. We have to kind of get this cold air and trough in position, and then we're going to have to see, if any kind of storm systems evolve. One of the things that I would point out, by the way, is that there's nothing that says that we can't go from being, average and dry or above average and dry to below average and dry. That is conceivable. I can certainly remember a number of times where we get into cold patterns, but the storm development is sorely lacking. So there's no guarantee with all this cold air, if if the models are correct, with this colder scheme developing across North America, there is absolutely no guarantee that we're going to see anything regarding snow. So I'm coming back now to your chats. Let me give a big hello to everybody. Boy, you guys are talking today. This is awesome. All right, so I'm not going to run and say hi to everybody. So you all know when I say hi to everybody, I mean all of you. So this way we don't go too crazy here. Adam Fitz 1969, I believe the rougher winter will be a late one, but I believe we will see some good storms for mid-January with one smaller storm in late December. Well, you know, Adam, one of my friends who's a forecaster at the Weather Service lines up with a forecast similar to yours in terms of his view of where we're going in the long range. So that's not impossible. We could just turn cold and you know, and fight for moisture along the way if you're looking for some snow events through all of this. That is not, there's nothing that says it can't be cold and dry. Let's see. Here we go. Something with Ireland. Okay. Oh, guys, you guys are being very kind. Always smiling. Thank you very much. You're being very kind with that. Let's see. Irish Med Office said nothing about weather warning, and the UK are in yellow for snow, ice, fog, and rain. I think that lines up with what the models are showing, but I really want that, you know, I really would like to know if that's sort of a, you know, a sort of a lake effect that occurs in the eastern part of England when the wind is from the northeast. So if anybody knows, that'd be great. Let's see. Caden Williams goes private. I believe some of us may see a little snow from this pattern if it keeps up. I think once the trough, you know, establishes itself, then we can, you know, start looking around to see, you know, if there's going to be some energy. One of the things that happens when you get a trough that deep, you know, when you've got a trough that deep that runs from far northern Canada down into the southeast, that models may not be very good at in the long ranges, there could be certainly embedded energy in there that drives southeastward. And we won't really see that show up until we get, say, inside day 7 or day 6. So I would look for that possibility. Thank you, Adam. Very, very kind words, by the way. And you're right. I no guarantees from the management. I do not promise anything. Let's see. 5 Celsius here. 41 at Dublin right now. Okay, well, you're going to get colder the way it looks. 44 in New Jersey, or about 60. Correct. And we're going to go to 60. So we're going to go to 15C or higher here on Wednesday. Let's see. Okay, I'm just trying to get through everybody's questions. Garden State weather is here, which is great, and you guys are very kind. You're saying very kind things, and I appreciate that. Okay, Stephen Franco. Let's see. Okay, good amount of cold air over me. Ethan B wants snowfall. Where are you, Ethan? I'm kind of curious. All right, I'm not seeing too many questions here. Ethan B, new subscriber. Oh, very good. Good for you. Welcome on board. Good to see you here. Where are we? Jason Schaefer, hoping the cold air will arrive in time and the trough will deepen enough. Well, you know what? You certainly could make an argument that that will happen, and you can certainly make arguments that it won't. We really, I mean, I know that's sort of a non-answer, but you know how the weather world works. A lot of times we give non-answers, but we're going to, you know, every run is bringing us a little bit closer, so we're going to see our, you know, the confidence level should gradually build as we move through this week. At least we know for sure no big storms this week and into this weekend. Once that front goes through on Thursday, we should be fine for Friday and Saturday. By the way, you know, the models, you know, with the beginnings of that trough, there is some hanging energy back, and with the low developing to the east, you know, an argument can be made that there could be some rain here for Sunday in some places, especially for New England, and maybe some snow in the colder areas in interior New England. Not a lot, but something. There might be some precipitation to deal with as we go into the weekend. Let's see. Boy, you guys really have been at it with conversations to each other. I really am. I'm liking this. Ryan Ford, do I think the winter will contain one blockbuster storm, or will it be more of a series of smaller systems? Well, I got to tell you, the 30 years from 1970 to 2000, the general feature, now there were exceptions, of course, along the way. Obviously, the blizzard of 78, 83, 96, and one or two other storms in the mix. But for the most part, during that 30 years, the storms were not the traditional coastal blockbusters. Since from 2000 to through last winter, we've had an overabundance of coastal storms that have produced blockbuster snowstorms. So I'm thinking that we're still in that kind of a cycle. If you want to measure this winter against the winters of the last 16 years, that at some point I would think that there would be the threat for something that would be on the, let's call it, on the large side. I think the odds would favor that because of the fact that the winters that we have had over the last 17 years have seen those kinds of storms, as opposed to the prior 30 when we saw very few of those. And by the way, the numbers are pretty staggering because there were only, I believe, 5 or 6 storms in that 30-year time frame from 1970 to 2000 that produced a foot or more of snow in New York City. And in fact, New York City in and of itself went from 1983 until the 1993 superstorm, almost 10 years without seeing a storm produce a 12-inch snowfall in a 24-hour period. You had had quite a few. We've had a few winters in the last 16 years where we've had 3 storms that have produced 1 foot plus snowfalls in areas in and around New York City. So again, I would lean to the idea that at some point we're probably going to see the threat for one sort of blockbuster storm. I don't think that's really a forecast. It's just sort of an observation and playing with numbers. And Stephen Franco, 99 Wills, is asking about Wisconsin and Illinois with the same idea. That's the one other thing that's happened in the last few years. It seems to be a shift away from the Great Lakes and, toward the East Coast. But you know what? I'll give it to you. I bet you at some point the trough will set up far enough west that you should have something, and certainly will come out better than what you have in the last couple of winters if you're a snow lover. Julia B. From upstate New York, Western Greenland blocks always needed to push cold air down to the northeastern U.S. No, that is not the only way. It's one of several ways. But it's, the thing with the Greenland block is that, if you look at some of the bigger snowstorms that have happened over the last, 100 years, there's always been some semblance of blocking going on. We're talking about the storms that last, a day and a half, 2 days. Like the 95-96 storm, just to put one out there. But you don't need blocking to get cold. There are other ways to get, if you've got a good vortex that's locked up in Canada with a strong flow, you could still have these troughs that go out, but as each one goes out, you get a cold air mass with a warm up and then another cold air mass coming down from Canada. So you don't need the block necessarily. However, when you've got that western base block, especially deep in the winter, when you get into later January and February and you've got that western-based block set up like that, you can get really, really cold in upstate New York. Those are the times when you get down to 30 and 40 degrees below zero during the overnights with a screaming wind down the Hudson Valley. So that's what you would look for with the western block. Stephen Franco, ocean temps around Long Island starting to cool down, and they're still kind of warm. They're still kind of warm. They're still running above normal up our way. But I got to tell you, that is one good coastal low away from upwelling and getting those temperatures to go below normal. Actually, you wouldn't even need that. If you've got a situation with strong northwest winds over a couple of days, that could take care of your ocean water temperatures in a big hurry. So I wouldn't worry too much about the ocean water temperatures at this point, because you can quickly get those to normalize under certain conditions, and they probably will to some degree as we get into the middle part of the month. The singer wants snow for Texas. Well, you know what? You're going to have that deep trough coming down from the north. I'm going to think that the coldest of the cold air might be east of you, but you might get into some of that. Now, whether there's any moisture to deal with, you got to get something to come out of the southwest, or at least down the Rockies, perhaps, and diving into Texas. And right now, it's hard for me to look at the models and say that something like that is imminent. So we'll see when we get, as I always seem to say this, but we will see when we get closer. So the bottom line is that's what we're going to have to do. Ryan Ford, coastal systems in the wintertime thrive off of warm ocean temperatures like tropical systems. Yes and no. I mean, I think, the models have that all baked into the cake. I've seen years where the water temperatures have been warmer than normal, and they haven't really produced anything out of extraordinary in terms of the depth of lows. And on the other hand, I've seen big storms with colder than normal ocean water temperatures. So, you can have it both ways. The dynamics in the upper atmosphere, I think, are a little bit more important than the ocean water temperatures as a whole. Christopher Alley, any new lectures on Long Island? Yes, Christopher. Sunday, I will be in Middle Island at the Longwood Library, I believe at 2 o'clock. Okay, and then I am taking a break. The next Long Island one is going to be on Monday, January the 8th at 7 o'clock at the Bayport Blue Point Library. Also, this Wednesday, today's Monday, so Wednesday, I will be in Elmsford at the Elmsford Town Hall in Westchester County, just to the west of White Plains. If any of you are in this area, that is at 7 p.m. again at the Elmsford Town Hall, and we'll be talking winter weather at all of those. And I've got a few more coming down the road as we go through February and into next spring. I got a bunch of them booked already. So if you are in your local area, if you're in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, the Hudson Valley, or on Long Island, you'd like me to come to your local library, let them know that I'm available. You can give them my Facebook page and give them the information. I've sent it out to them, but sometimes if you folks that go to your local libraries want to see something and you let them know, they'll be more inclined to contact me rather than them contacting me out of the blue. Okay, folks, I got a show to get ready for. It was a pretty good discussion today. We had a nice crowd, and that's good. The questions were good. So, maybe if you want a homework assignment, keep an eye on tropicaltidbits.com, Levi Cowan's site, which we give him many thanks for letting us use here and elsewhere. Tropicaltidbits.com. Follow the next couple of bottle runs of the GFS and the European. The next one starts at 10:30 tonight, and again you can sleep through the one at 4:30 in the morning, but then 10:30 tomorrow morning, the next the sequence of model runs. The European, you can check tomorrow morning because that runs in the middle of the night. It doesn't start till 1 a.m., so you might be asleep for that. But check out those model runs. Start getting yourself more familiar with the surface maps, the upper air maps. Even if you don't, if you're not understanding them, save your questions, and I'll be more than happy to take them. Chris, sorry you can't make it on Sunday. Happy birthday. Your granddaughter's 16. My God, God bless. I'm going to be a grandfather, so the time does fly, buddy. I hope you're well, and say hi to everyone for me. Chris and I used to work together not too long ago, and called him Pops, and that he was. But check out tropicaltidbits.com, everybody. Okay, so Look, website meteorologistjoecioffi.com, Facebook page meteorologist Joe Cioffi, Twitter at Joe Cioffi, Cioffi, and you can check out the links to the Joe Stradamus store if you want to get something for Christmas. Maybe you want a Joe Stradamus Santa Claus mug, or a Angry Ben, my buddy Ben Scott, who does NYCWeatherNow.com. There's Angry Ben stuff on there. I've got some mugs with satellite pictures on them from this past hurricane season. One nice one, I think, is the one that shows Irene, Jose, and Katia all in the same shot. So if you're interested, that's go to joestradamus.com, joestradamus.com, and that'll take you to the Joe Stradamus store. Okay, no obligation, folks. You don't have to if you don't want to. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.